Hi, and welcome to OTH Sports View. I'm Times Herald sports editor Chuck Pollock, and with me today, we've given him an excused absence. Jeff Madigan isn't here, and he normally talks about the women's basketball program at St. Bonaventure. But on my right, J.P. Butler, who covers the men's program, and it's that time of year where it's really interesting to follow the progress of two teams that are enjoying really good seasons. Interestingly, both those teams have had a marriage of two programs over the past 12 days coming up through next week, where two programs very much have affected what happens with the Bonnies, men and women. One, of course, is St. Louis. Both those games are in the books, both Bona wins, both at the RC. On the upcoming schedule for both teams is George Washington. Huge games for both teams. Starting tomorrow, that will be Saturday, against George Washington for the men, and next Wednesday for the women. Enormous games in the standings. JP, this is the time of year where in the 8 years you covered this team, we don't talk about at-large NCAA bids, but all of a sudden this year, that's kind of happened.
We've never had this sort of discussion, I think, at this point in the year. I said in my column today that there was another instance in 2011-12, Andrew Nicholson's senior season, where you went into the year thinking, okay, maybe because of him, they could be good enough to be an NCAA tournament team this year, but it didn't really sort of go that way. And really all through the regular season, they were sort of hovering around 500. That never sort of came to fruition the way we thought until the very end of the season when they got hot and they win the A-10 tournament. And so we weren't having this type of discussion where in mid-February here we're talking about resumes, and we're talking about what they have to do the rest of the way, and who their key wins are over right now, and where their RPI is. It's become a thing now where it's almost like a daily RPI watch to see where that stands. And so it has been sort of an interesting last month or so. I think when they got off to that 4-0 start in January, I think people wanted to automatically right then and there start talking about, something's happening here. They could really be in a position where they're really doing something at the end of the season. And I thought certainly that was a great start for them, but that it was sort of too early to start talking about that kind of stuff. They still had a lot of difficult games to go. They still had most of their A-10 schedule left to play. But now, a month later, we've gotten to the point where it really is becoming that time to sort of start acknowledging this a little bit. I think with each passing win, they've now won 4 in a row after that 3-game losing streak. And with each passing win, it's becoming a little bit more real, so to speak. And if they're able to sort of keep it going here, it does become more of a possibility. And I guess who would have really, even the most optimistic Bona fan, I don't think would have predicted this kind of success, that these kind of discussions would be happening in mid-February.
One of the interesting things as it relates to the women, they're 20-4. They're 9-2 in the conference. They're alone in third, and they're going to have a shot at both of the teams in front of them, George Washington and Duquesne. Interestingly, the Bona women had a very big game earlier this week against St. Louis, supposed to be a toss-up game, and the Bonnies won absolutely convincingly. That's what we expected out of the men last Sunday. 14.5-point favorites, and they need a shot at the end to win. It seems that this is a year where the Bona men have had a proclivity to win close games, and that's the kind of good fortune you need when you're going to have a good season.
I think there are a couple of traits about this team that are maybe different from some of the other teams before it, and that's the reason why they're having more success this season. I think one is just how good the backcourt has been with Jalen Adams and Marcus Posley, and we've said, ad nauseum even here on our show, that when you have guards like that, you're going to have a chance in every game. And I think one of the other things is, like you said, their just ability this year to kind of find it at the end of games and to sort of close more of these close games out than they have in past years. We've seen in a lot of years some of these games that come down to the end, especially on the road, those are the ones that a lot of times often get away from them.
Right.
You know, the example against Fordham on Friday night, Bona has a lead, they lose that lead, and all of a sudden they're down 4 at the end of that game. In a lot of other instances, that's a game where that probably ultimately does get away from them and it becomes a loss. Well, this year, same with the St. Louis game before it, they have the ability to make the play to sort of overcome that adversity. You know, the resiliency, I think, led by guys like Posley and Adams who are capable of making these big plays at the end of games. And to find a way to close these games out as opposed to letting them get away. And you know, now all of a sudden you see a situation where those could have been 2 losses and you're 14-8 and more along the lines of what we've seen from the Bona teams over the last couple of years. But instead you're 16-6, and you know, as we mentioned, in a spot here where you're talking about you know, their RPI is up to number 37 according to CBSSports.com. They've got a couple of good wins. They've won 4 in a row. Their schedule is still pretty favorable moving forward, although a huge one tomorrow, which we'll talk about. And you know, in a position here to really still do something pretty special this season.
It's interesting to me, and you're absolutely right. We spend a lot of time talking about the big 3. But the significance of that is it is 3. And even if a team has 2 really dependable scoring players, good teams can find a way to shut down 2. Shutting down 3 is a different circumstance. You have the 2 seniors, Deion Wright, Marcus Posley. They've been playing well. Last 2 games they played well. You could argue that the sophomore, Jalen Adams, did not have a good game against St. Louis or against Fordham, except at the buzzer, he knocks down the 3 to win the game against St. Louis. And then against Fordham, numbers aren't real big, but 9 assists. So even in a game where he wasn't at his best, he contributed. And you say that's why a big 3 is critical, because somebody finds a way, somebody steps up.
And that's just what they've sort of been doing all season here. And you know, I think coming into the year, I thought, and I think most people certainly thought, that this team would be pretty good this year. I don't know what that would have meant exactly, but I think they were going to be pretty good because they had those 3 guys. And as long as they had those 3 guys, they would be able to overcome some of the depth issues that we've talked about, some of the size issues. They're actually the smallest team, average height-wise, in the A10. They would be able to overcome that stuff and be pretty good because those 3 guys can really, those 3 guys are enough and then some to make a team do pretty well. But the fact that I think each of them has gone even maybe a little bit above and beyond where we thought they would even be. All 3 of them right now are having all conference caliber seasons. It's gotten to I never would have thought that coming into this year, that all 3 guys right now, if the season ended today, all 3 of those guys would probably be on all conference teams, and 2 of them might be knocking on the door to first team right now, Marcus and Jalen. And so if you've got 3 guys like that, you're going to have a chance. They've gone above and beyond, and they've gotten enough contributions from the rest of those role guys, the Denzel Greggs, the Nelson Caputos, you know, even, you know, from here and there, a guy like Tyson and Derek Woods, and then you add that on top of what they've been able to do sort of at the end of the games and some of the clutch plays they've made and the ability to win that they've displayed this year, and it's all added up to where they are right now. 4th place, you know, sole possession of 4th place, and with an RPI of number 37, you know, in the A10 right now.
We're down to tomorrow. Bona women are on the road. They're playing at UMass. UMass is winless in the conference. Coaches are always wary. I understand that. Certainly, Jim Crowley's always wary about playing a team like that because he can find examples where UMass has played pretty well. Ideally, though, they go there and they win at UMass tomorrow and position themselves even better in the conference. Here at home, though, it's alumni weekend. A genuine sellout, not a speculative sellout. This is a genuine sellout. George Washington is here. It's an enormous game for both teams, because really, as you pointed out, this game is as important for George Washington in the talk about speculation about an at-large bid
and things like that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so this is, you pointed out, this is maybe the biggest game they played at home in years, and to me that's a valid argument.
I mean, to me, I've just sort of been thinking about it. This might be the biggest regular season game of the Mark Schmidt era. You could argue that maybe in 2011-12, that last game with St. Joe's, which ended up being an amazing double overtime game, was from the standpoint that they needed that to get the bye going into the A10 tournament. But this really, to me, even goes beyond that, because now you're talking about the possibility of the NCAA tournament and being a postseason team at the end of the year. This is a game, I mean, it's just a confluence of things from the standpoint that it's a sellout. We talked about an alumni weekend. The crowd will probably be amazing in this one.
Right.
As far as I know, some of the people I've talked to at Bona, this is the first sellout going back to the 2003-04 season when St. Joe's came in, number 2 in the country with that great team, and it was a blowout. So you're talking about 12 years since the last sellout, and you're talking about two teams who really, really, really need this game. Bona is in 4th place right now, just ahead of George Washington in 5th place. So it's for seeding implications and things like that. And then what you just said right there, the idea that they both need to still get some more quality wins here. And beating each other would be a quality win for both teams. It would be another game for their quote-unquote resume, going forward here. And so to me, this is where Bona is sort of at right now. We talk about 4th place and number 37 in the RPI. To me, it's just all about, over these last 7 games, maintaining sort of where they are, or maybe even creeping up just a little bit more, because that's where you sort of need to be a legitimate bubble team, to be a team that will get some consideration at the end. And so if you are able to beat a George Washington tomorrow, and you are able to, make sure that you win the other games that you're supposed to win and don't lose any. They're going into LaSalle next week. They're last in the A10. They've got 1 A10 win. They're 1-10. That's a game that they can't lose. It's a road game, so it's tough. But if they're going to continue to be there, they can't lose a game like that, because then it all comes undone. They can't lose to a Duquesne at home. They can't lose to a UMass at home. You can lose to a Dayton on the road. They're a top 20 team in the country. But you need to be able to maintain, over the last 7 games here and get another quality win or two. And tomorrow is the opportunity to do that before what should be just an amazing crowd.
For the Bona women, the story is the same, but it comes a little bit later. On Wednesday, in comes George Washington, 22-2, atop the standings with a 10-1 record. That is the Bona women's biggest game of the season. Very well could be its largest crowd, and that will very much determine the direction of the rest of the season for them. We'll make sure that next week we recruit Jeff Madigan to come back here and talk about this. Obviously, JP will have a lot to talk about. Thank you for watching OTH Sports View. We'll be back next week.